What facts about history will never be taught in school? Captain Bartholomew Roberts the pirate gave his pirate crew a bedtime, gotta have your 8 hours so you can make that pillaging tomorrow. The US government went to war in Guatemala over bananas. Hitler's nephew served for the US in World War II. Stalin's son killed himself in a concentration camp, yet Stalin mocked him until his death. About the lost children of Francoism. These children were abducted from Republican parents who were either in jail or had been assassinated by nationalist troops during the Spanish Civil War in Francoist Spain. These children were then given to families that would practice Catholicism and nationalism. However, this lasted after 1975, when Franco died. By then this practice was already a trafficking business run by nuns, doctors and nurses. My mom is a lost children and she has told me that almost anyone has found their parents. Ben Franklin once wrote a thorough essay about how it's better to date older women. The Diary of Anne Frank included a lot about masturbation and self-exploration, but it was edited out. Here's an excerpt of such a part of the diary. Until I was 11 or 12, I didn't realize there was a second set of labia on the inside, since you couldn't see them. What's even funnier is that I thought urine came out of the clitoris. When you're standing up, all you see from the front is hair. Between your legs there are two soft, cushiony things, also covered with hair, which press together when you're standing, so you can't see what's inside. They separate when you sit down and they're very red and quite fleshy on the inside. In the upper part, between the outer labia, there's a fold of skin that, on second thought, looks like a kind of blister. That's the clitoris. Also, Anne Frank expressed an interest in girls and boys in her diary, showing that she was probably bisexual. Here's an excerpt. I remember that once when I slept with a girlfriend I had a strong desire to kiss her, and that I did do so. I go into ecstasies every time I see the naked figure of a woman, such as Venus. For example, if only I had a girlfriend. That's the real tragedy of the Holocaust. We're sitting here over 70 years after her death marveling at the curiosity and fastidiousness of a young girl. Someone who surely should have grown up to be a very bright adult, maybe a capable mother, perhaps she would have been a part of helping her country rebuild after the war in some way. Instead, her life and so many others was ended for the irrational needs of a hateful ideology. It's a strange part of the human condition that we're extremely bad at understanding things on a large scale. Hearing about crowds of people being machine gunned to death, or forced into gas chambers somehow doesn't hit home as hard as getting to know the intimate thoughts of a young girl who died many years ago. It touches us more closely than trying to relate to someone put up against a wall and killed. We all have a moral obligation to remember the death of Anne Frank, and every one of the 60+ million people who died in World War II. Her story is only one tiny part of the whole miserable human experience. The Nazis had absolutely no sympathy for children, who were some of the first to be sent to gas chambers, often along with their mothers. I remember seeing in one documentary, I think The World at War, a survivor mentioning that she initially went into the children's group when they were being separated, but an SS soldier told her to go with the adults instead. She was a teenager at the time. Her mother and younger sibling were immediately gassed, while she survived the war. It's scary how heartless a process it was. And it's scary how human beings can be won over by such a brutal ideology and are made to set aside common empathy so easily. I should really go donate to a refugee charity. Edit. Reading this back, I realized that it could be inferred that the SS soldier acted with grace and humanity. Thought it worth mentioning that it's likely he only saved the girl because he was attracted to her. He later raped her. Central Park, in New York, was created under eminent domain and raised a predominantly black and Irish community called Seneca Village. Most of the inhabitants were compensated, but many felt they did not receive fair market value. According to the Louise Chipley Slavacek, author of New York's Central Park, the pro-park lobby were largely affluent merchants, bankers and landowners who wanted a fashionable and safe public place where they and their families could mingle and promenade. Native Americans weren't granted citizenship until the 1920s. How much in common we have with people of the past. Pictures, sculptures and carvings going all the way back showing sex, drugs, drinking, partying and graffiti that you would see on an abandoned building or train today. The plight of the middle class and class struggles versus the upper class is the same today as for thousands of years. If we could listen to a court jester, their jokes would ring true today more than likely. Outside of technology making things faster, easier in a sense, we're still enjoying complaining about most of the same things we have been for millennia. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it, and there is nothing new under the sun is real. Chinese Express Wu Zetian required people to please her orally as a greeting. Literally anything to do with Polynesian history. It took me an anthropology class in college to learn about human zoos. That is, zoos where white people paid money to see Aboriginal people from various regions in cages. It happened all over the world, including in the Bronx Zoo in, like, the 1920s. I had never heard about anything like that in any schooling before that, and I doubt most people have. The Japanese military kidnapped hundreds, if not thousands, of Korean and Chinese women during World War II and forced them to be sex workers for the Japanese military. Some Japanese women were even drafted to be comfort women, but they didn't know what they were being drafted for until they were there. It's actually a pretty common thing in many wars, because the military wants to keep the soldiers pure by kidnapping these women. They know that they aren't riddled with STDs. It's very sad, especially because when the war is over, many of the camps are cleared and these women are forced to find their way back home, without even knowing the war is over. If they aren't too afraid or ashamed to go back home, they're usually turned away from their families because they are so ashamed of what happened. The Tulsa Race Massacre. In the early 1920s, Tulsa, Oklahoma had a very affluent black neighborhood called Black Wall Street. Basically, many African Americans were doing better financially than whites. White folks were angry about their success and wanted their land. An African American was wrongly accused of assault by a white girl, and the whites used this as an excuse to attack the neighborhood, including dropping bombs from World War I era planes. Many were killed and beaten. Over 10,000 people were left homeless due to houses and businesses being burned down. This is the greatest single incident of racial violence in U.S. history. Turkey genocided Armenians. My great-great-grandparents had everything: farms and lands, many horses. Everything changed after the genocide. They were forced to leave their homeland, their homes and everything, and to start this adventure to search help in another country. They lost almost everything. Only my great-grandfather and I think his sister have survived it, and the only story I knew is that they had to bribe Turkish men to not harm them and to help them coming to Bulgaria. They gave almost any valuable thing they brought with them. They had also things stolen from them and they were humiliated. The only two things they managed saving were 2 rings which the granny of my granny used to wear. So yeah. It was tough and rough, and now I am ashamed that no one is talking about the Armenian genocide or simply taking any valuable lesson from it. John Wilkes Booth's brother saved Lincoln's son Robert Todd Lincoln. Robert Lincoln was traveling by train from New York to Washington. He got off the train during a stop at Jersey City. He saw that the platform was extremely crowded. In order to be polite and wait his turn, he pressed his back to one of the train's cars. About 30 to 60 seconds later, the train started to move. The train wiped him down and dropped him into the space between the platform and train. Abe's son would have died if a stranger hadn't yanked him out of the hole by his collar. The stranger was Edwin Booth, a good actor in the 19th century and the brother of John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was the guy that killed Abe only a few years later. Hitler gave his soldiers meth because it was performance enhancing. Not only that, Hitler himself was claimed to be an amphetamine addict, with his personal physician giving him regular intravenous injections from 1942 until his death in 1945, although he is said to have started occasional use of amphetamines in 1937. Albert Speer has said that this addiction played a large role in Hitler's increasingly erratic behavior as the war dragged on, and worked to increase his paranoia and diminish his mental stability as his use continued. Methamphetamine was sold under the trade name Pervitin in Germany, only becoming a controlled substance in 1986. It was especially popular with tank crews, who gave the drug the nickname Panzerschokolade or tank chocolates, and Luftwaffe pilots, who alternately called them Stuka-Tabletten or Stuka-tablets and Hermann Göring-Pillen or Hermann Göring pills. Millions of pills were manufactured in 1940 alone. But even early on, problems were being uncovered as soldiers became addicted to the drug, and were becoming erratic and combative in their operations, becoming difficult to discipline and control the more they used the drug. The Wehrmacht was so concerned by these side effects that they moved to restrict Pervitin's usage with their troops as early as 1940, though the drug probably remained in use throughout the war by the other forces of Germany. Germany was not the only amphetamine user in World War II. Japan also manufactured methamphetamine under the name Philippin and is estimated to have manufactured 1 billion pills through the course of the war. Finland was another user of Pervitin, though it seems their use was mostly restricted to special forces. Allied forces, especially American bomber crews flying over Europe and Japan, were given Benzedrine, a different kind of amphetamine, in order to stave off fatigue on long combat sorties. Amphetamine use in the U.S. Armed Forces and other armies actually continued long after the end of World War II. Some of their last use in a military operation was during the Persian Gulf War, when Allied pilots would again use them to stay awake and alert during long missions over Iraq. Because of problems with addiction and lack of focus and control with extended amphetamine use, it has largely been replaced with modafinil. The Heart of Darkness is based in the Congo Free State, which was presided over by King Leopold II of Belgium. Conrad wrote the story in part as a critique not just of European imperialism but also of the atrocities and crimes against humanity perpetuated during that time. It is estimated that between 5 to 10 million of a roughly 20 million population died during Belgian rule of the Congo Free State due to a combination of famine, disease, and forced labor. Belgium enriched itself through forced slavery and coercion, using strict quotas for the harvest of natural rubber, and an individual failing to meet a quota was punishable by death. For me personally, we read the book in high school, but we never learned the historical context or about King Leopold's part in all of this.